Quit being so dramatic, my father barked as I lay sprawled at the foot of the staircase, struggling to breathe. My ribs throbbed with searing pain where my older brother, Marcus, had kicked me after violently pushing me down. My fingers, shaking uncontrollably, reached for my phone in an attempt to call 911, but before I could finish, Dad ripped it out of my hand. "You're always blowing everything out of proportion." My mother, Patricia, stood in the kitchen doorway, releasing a weary sigh. She didn't even bother checking to see if I was actually injured. My name is Tanya Rodriguez, and I'm 19 years old. I live in Tucson, Arizona, in what most people would assume is an average suburban household. On the surface, we probably appear like a typical American family. Dad holds a position as a supervisor at Gravora Group, a local manufacturing plant. Mom works part-time as a receptionist at a nearby dental practice. Marcus, my 22-year-old brother, recently finished college and moved back in while looking for employment. But behind the facade of our neat little home, I've been surviving a private nightmare for years. The assault that left me wheezing in a heap at the bottom of the stairs wasn't Marcus' first act of violence. It was merely the most brutal one so far. He'd shoved me simply because I accidentally brushed against him while carrying a load of laundry upstairs. "Watch where you're going, moron," he growled, then shoved me so hard I toppled down all 12 wooden steps. When I landed at the bottom, disoriented and barely breathing, he followed and slammed his boot into my side. The sickening crack I heard made my heart sink. But this time, something was different. As I lay motionless, watching my parents coldly disregard my pain like they always had, a chilling clarity began to settle in my chest. The way Dad snatched the phone from my grasp, the way Mom rolled her eyes at my suffering, I finally realized the painful truth: they were never going to protect me. They were complicit. This wasn't just Marcus acting like a thug. This was a deliberate family effort to keep me powerless, silent, and broken. "Get up and stop making a spectacle," Dad snapped, towering over me with his arms crossed tightly. "Your brother barely laid a hand on you?" Mom silently nodded, already turning back to sip her coffee like nothing had happened. "Honestly, Tanya, you act like someone tried to kill you," she muttered without emotion. I forced my aching body to rise, swallowing a scream as my fractured ribs screamed in protest. Marcus stood smugly at the top of the stairs, clearly proud of what he'd done. In that exact moment, while watching all three of them disregard my agony as if it meant nothing, I made a decision, one that would change everything. I was going to record and collect proof of every single thing they did to me. I would build undeniable evidence, facts they couldn't twist or explain away. And when I had enough, I would make sure every last one of them paid for what they put me through. They thought I was being theatrical. They had no idea what real drama actually looked like. Living in that house had always felt like a prison. But it took me years to fully understand how twisted my family really was. Marcus had been abusing me since we were young children, and our parents had been shielding him the entire time. When I was 8 and Marcus was 11, he shoved me off my bike so hard I split open my forehead and needed stitches. "She fell," Mom told the emergency room staff casually. "Kids are always clumsy." When I tried to speak up, Dad dug his fingers into my shoulder so hard he left bruises. He leaned down and hissed that if I ever contradicted my mother again, I'd lose my allowance for a whole month. That cycle repeated itself throughout my childhood. Marcus would punch me, shove me, or worse, and my parents would either pretend it didn't happen or imply it was somehow my fault. "You must have started it," Mom would scold. "Boys will be boys," Dad would say with a shrug. By the time I was in high school, I had accepted the abuse as just another part of daily life. I assumed all families were this cruel. Living in our home meant constantly being on edge, like walking barefoot on broken glass. Marcus inherited Dad's volcanic temper and Mom's complete emotional detachment. He'd back me into corners and slam me into the walls if I so much as looked at him wrong. He'd trip me in front of guests and laugh as I fell. When I was 16, he once hurled a glass at my head for changing the channel on the TV. It shattered behind me, slicing my cheek. Mom saw the blood and simply sighed. "You should be more careful around glass," she said coldly, but worse than the bruises and cuts was the crushing loneliness. They trained me so well to keep quiet that I never told a single teacher, friend, or relative what was going on. I feared they'd think I was lying, or worse, that I deserved it. I felt ashamed. What kind of person lets their own family beat them and says nothing? I felt weak and worthless. And Marcus made sure I believed it every time he raised his hand to me after graduation. I planned to escape, go to college, get away. But Dad persuaded me to stay home and attend the local community college instead. It's more affordable. He claimed, "We can support each other better this way." But what he truly meant was that they wanted to keep me trapped, available to absorb Marcus' rages and handle the chores no one else wanted to do. I cooked the meals, scrubbed the floors, washed everyone's clothes, and endured whatever cruelty they decided to throw my way. But something shifted inside me that day at the bottom of the staircase. Maybe it was the way my father yanked the phone out of my hand, deliberately preventing me from calling for help. Maybe it was the complete apathy in my mother's expression as I lay on the floor, struggling to draw breath. Or maybe it was Marcus' smug, triumphant grin as he stood above me, pleased with the damage he'd inflicted. Whatever it was, something inside me snapped, and for the first time, I realized this wouldn't end until I found the strength to end it myself. They had underestimated me for nearly 2 decades, treating me like I was too fragile, too naive, too passive to ever resist. But they were about to learn just how badly they had misjudged me. 3 days after the stairway attack, I was still walking slowly, each breath sending a sharp jab through my side. I'd wrapped my ribs with an elastic compression bandage I'd picked up from the pharmacy. I told the cashier I'd pulled a muscle while working out. The bruises on my torso had ripened into deep purples and blacks, grotesque, reminders of Marcus' rage, but no one in my family had bothered to check on me. Not one word of concern. That cold silence was going to be their greatest mistake. I began with research. I looked up Arizona's laws on domestic violence and physical abuse. What I found chilled me to my core. Marcus violence wasn't just the result of sibling rivalry or a dysfunctional household. It was criminal. Felony-level criminal. My father ripping away my phone when I tried to call emergency services. That was obstruction of justice. My mother's years of minimizing and covering for Marcus' abuse made her legally complicit, an accessory after the fact. I hadn't just been raised in a toxic home. I'd grown up surrounded by criminals who had convinced me that their behavior was normal. The truth hit me like a punch to the chest. I sat in my room, laptop open, scrolling through one legal statute after another that described in graphic legal detail the exact horror I'd been living through. Aggravated assault, child endangerment, witness intimidation, conspiracy to conceal, abuse, every bruise I was told to cover, every lie they forced me to repeat, every time they said I was exaggerating. It was all evidence. And it all pointed to years of calculated harm. But I also discovered something essential. I couldn't just tell my story. I would need proof, concrete, irrefutable evidence. Marcus was strategic. He usually inflicted injuries where they wouldn't be visible. And my parents were seasoned manipulators, skilled at making me question my own reality. If I was going to expose them, I had to outthink them. That same night, I made my first secret trip to the emergency room. I chose a hospital across town, one far enough away that my family would never suspect I'd gone there. I told the intake nurse the truth, that my brother had shoved me down a flight of stairs and kicked me in the ribs. I shared the history of abuse and my parents' role in hiding it. The doctor, Dr. Williams, was kind and thorough. She ordered x-rays, which confirmed 2 fractured ribs. and documented the bruising with high-resolution photographs that showed clear signs of being kicked while lying down. Have you thought about filing a police report? Dr. Williams asked softly. This kind of injury from a family member is extremely serious. Not yet, I replied honestly, but I'm collecting everything I can. She nodded with understanding and ensured that the medical records specifically stated the vibe. Injuries were consistent with domestic violence. She also handed me pamphlets about local shelters, legal assistance, and therapy resources. For the first time in my life, an adult acknowledged that my pain was real and that it was a crime. As I drove home with the hospital documentation, carefully hidden beneath the spare tire in my trunk, I felt something entirely unfamiliar. Hope that my family had always believed they were untouchable, that they could humiliate and harm me indefinitely without ever facing consequences. But they were about to find out that their 19-year-old scapegoat had become their biggest threat. 2 weeks later, Marcus handed me the perfect opportunity to strengthen my case. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when he barged in, seething with rage. Apparently, he'd been rejected for a job at Drift Shade Limited and, true to form, needed someone to blame, someone to hurt. This is all your fault, he spat, stepping aggressively into my space while I stirred pasta sauce on the stove. If I didn't have to deal with your constant drama at home, I could actually focus on finding a real job. I kept my tone calm and measured, knowing full well that our conversation and his behavior was being recorded by a tiny camera. I carefully concealed behind the coffee maker the night before. I don't know what you're talking about, Marcus. I haven't done anything to disrupt your job search. Don't play innocent, he growled, and shoved me hard against the countertop. The corner jabbed into my back, but I made no sound. Everything would be easier if you just disappeared. Hey! Grabbed my wrist with crushing force, twisting it until I cried out, then slammed my hand down onto the red-hot stove burner. I shrieked in agony and yanked my hand back, clutching it protectively as blistering pain ripped through me. The smell of scorched skin filled the room. Tears spilled down my cheeks, but Marcus only looked smug. Oops, he sneered. Maybe next time you'll be more careful. That's when Dad walked in. He took one look at my burned hand. Marcus. Defensive posture, and immediately defaulted to his favorite narrative: protect Marcus, blame me. What the hell happened? He barked, voice already accusatory. She burned herself, Marcus said smoothly, without hesitation. I warned her the burner was hot. She didn't listen. Dad nodded, as if this lie made perfect sense. Even though the red fingerprint shaped, burns on my wrist told an entirely different story. Tanya, he snapped, how many times do we have to tell you to pay attention when you're cooking? You could have set the whole kitchen on fire. I stared at him in stunned disbelief. My skin was literally blistering, and this was his response? Dad, I said, breath trembling. He shoved me. He forced my hand onto the burner. Look, his fingerprints are right there. I don't see anything, Dad replied flatly, refusing to even glance at my hand. And I'm tired of your constant lies. Maybe if you stopped trying to sabotage your brother, these accidents wouldn't keep happening. That's when Mom stepped into the doorway. She scanned the scene and, with terrifying ease, joined the cover-up. Oh, not this again, she sighed. Tanya, how many times are you going to hurt yourself and then try to frame Marcus? It's getting pathetic. I felt the heat of rage rise up inside me, but this time I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I stayed calm. Because I knew the truth was already recorded. Let them lie. Let them pretend. Let them believe they were still winning. The camera had caught everything. Marcus' violent assault, my clear attempt to explain, and both of my parents' cold, immediate gaslighting. The footage would be devastating in a courtroom. You're right, I whispered, cradling my injured hand against my chest, masking the fury that burned deeper than the flame ever could. I should have been more careful. All three of them blinked in mild surprise at my sudden agreement. But Marcus quickly regained his swagger and sneered, finally starting to get it. Maybe now you'll stop acting like such a drama queen over every little thing. I nodded submissively and excused myself to treat the burn. At the bathroom sink, I let cold water run over my hand, watching the blisters rise with quiet intensity. But unlike before, I wasn't crying. I was smiling for the first time in weeks. They thought I'd finally given in, that they'd succeeded in breaking me. What they didn't know was that they had just handed me the most incriminating evidence yet. The hidden camera had caught it all. A violent, deliberate felony assault in plain view of two adults, followed by an immediate attempt to cover it up. That wasn't just abuse, it was criminal conspiracy. 3 charges, 1 incident. My family was practically scripting their own indictments by the end of my 2nd month of collecting evidence. I had documented visits to 4 different hospitals, had hidden camera recordings of 3 separate physical attacks, and had compiled a detailed journal chronicling over a decade of emotional, verbal, and physical abuse. But I still needed one final, undeniable act, something so outrageous, so irrefutable, that even the most skeptical prosecutor wouldn't dare question the case. Marcus, in his arrogance, handed me that moment without hesitation. It happened on a Tuesday night in late September. I was in my room reviewing notes for an upcoming criminology exam, a course I'd taken specifically to learn the legal tools I'd eventually use to destroy them. Marcus barged into my room without knocking, clearly drunk and itching for a target. Turn that damn music off, he slurred, even though the room was completely silent. Some of us are trying to think. There's no music, Marcus, I replied calmly, my voice perfectly level, projecting clearly toward the audio recorder I'd hidden inside my desk lamp. You should probably lie down. You've been drinking. His eyes narrowed, his face twisting with the familiar cocktail of rage and ego. Don't tell me what to do, you little bitch. I'm sick of your mouth. He stumbled forward and struck me across the face with the back of his hand so hard the room spun. I collapsed out of my chair, hitting the edge of the dresser as I went down. But this time, I didn't stay down. I rose again, slower than before, and met his gaze head-on. That really hurt, Marcus. Why would you hit me? Because you had it coming, he hissed. Because I can. What are you going to do about it? Run and cry to mommy and daddy again? We both know they don't give a damn about your crocodile tears. He yanked my hair and slammed my head into the wall. When I doubled over, he kicked me hard in the stomach. I dropped to the floor, gasping for breath, pain radiating through my ribs. But even then, I was calculating. The camera saw everything. Marcus drunk and belligerent, bragging about the abuse, mocking my pleas, and exposing the family's years of enabling. It was gold. Please stop, I whispered, staying in character. I didn't do anything. You exist, he snapped, delivering another brutal kick. That's enough. Then came the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Our parents appeared in the doorway. For one irrational moment, I thought they might actually intervene. Maybe they'd finally seen enough. Maybe they'd realized the monster they'd raised. But no doubt Mom looked annoyed by the noise. Dad just looked inconvenienced. What's going on in here? Dad asked flatly, as if finding me bloodied and broken on the floor was just a minor disruption. Tuesday evening, she tripped and started crying. Marcus lied smoothly. Same old theatrics. I looked up at them, my vision blurred by tears and swelling. Blood was running from the side of my forehead where it had struck the wall. He's lying, I said, voice hoarse. You saw him standing over me when you walked in. He hit me. He kicked me. Mom rolled her eyes with dramatic exasperation. Tanya, this is beyond ridiculous. You can't keep inventing stories every time you fall down. We're not idiots. She's right, Dad added without hesitation. We're done with these manipulations. Marcus was trying to help you, and now you're twisting everything again. You need to stop. The gaslighting was so blatant, so rehearsed. It was almost theatrical. They were, without realizing it, confessing to years of coordinated emotional abuse and denial. The camera recorded everything, the physical violence, the victim blaming, the unified front of denial. No jury would believe that any of it was. And no harm or parenting. It was monstrous. I understand, I said softly, slowly pushing myself to my feet. I'm sorry I caused trouble. They looked so satisfied with my quiet surrender, none of them realizing they'd just documented their own conspiracy in full high-definition detail. The final and most damning piece came a few weeks later early, October, 3 months into my documentation operation. By then, I'd established a consistent record across multiple emergency rooms in the Tucson area. Each visit marked a new injury, a new level of cruelty, a new medical professional who saw my injuries and took them seriously. The evidence was snowballing, but I needed one last explosive moment. Marcus, in his usual stupidity, delivered. He lost control over something utterly trivial. I'd used the last of the milk for my cereal. He erupted in a fury so violent it even took me by surprise. He stormed into his bedroom and emerged seconds later holding a baseball bat. "You think you're clever?" he bellowed, waving the bat inches from my face. "You think you can take whatever you want and just walk away? I'm done playing nice." I backed into the corner of the room, heart racing, not just from fear, but from anticipation. The upgraded HD camera I'd installed 2 days earlier was rolling, capturing every second in crystal clear video and stereo sound. Marcus, furious, me, clearly terrified. The bat swinging in his grip. It was perfect. "Marcus, please," I begged, deliberately keeping my voice steady and audible from the mic. "I didn't know we were out of milk. I'll go buy more." "Too late," he growled. "You're gonna learn today." He swung the bat and missed my head by inches. The wood cracked into the drywall, sending a cloud of plaster and dust into the air. I screamed. It wasn't even fake. That's when our parents burst into the room, drawn by the chaos. They saw Marcus holding the bat, saw the gaping hole in the wall, saw me cornered, trembling, and crying. Any normal parents would have intervened, would have demanded answers, would have called the police. Instead, Dad frowned at the wall. "Marcus, watch it. You're putting holes in the damn house." "She made me lose my temper," Marcus snapped, still holding the bat like it was his right. "She always pushes too far." Mom nodded, calm as ever. "We know she's difficult, sweetheart, but just be careful not to break anything next time." I looked at them, stunned not by the abuse, but by how unfazed they were by it. They weren't just enablers. They were partners in the crime. Their only concern was the hole in the wall, not the daughter who'd nearly had her skull caved in. The dysfunction wasn't just deep. It was systemic. It was sick. "Did you just see what happened?" I asked, my voice trembling with raw emotion. He nearly hit me with that bat. The only reason I'm still standing is because he missed my head by inches. The wall is proof. "Don't exaggerate," Mom said with a sigh. "Marcus was clearly just trying to get your attention. Maybe if you listened the first time instead of being so stubborn, he wouldn't need to raise his voice." "Raise his voice?" I echoed, stunned. He swung a baseball bat at my head. "I don't see a bat," Dad said coldly, though Marcus still had it in his hands. "And I don't see any injuries. What I do see is another one of your little performances." The outright rejection of reality was so blatant, so perfectly captured on camera, that I knew then I had everything I needed. 3 relentless months of meticulous evidence gathering had led to this, a rock-solid case no competent defense attorney could unravel. My family had built their own prison, lie by lie, on November 15th, exactly 4 months after Marcus pushed me down the stairs. I walked into the Pima County Attorney's office carrying a briefcase filled with evidence. Evidence that would dismantle my family from the inside out. I scheduled the meeting under the guise of reporting ongoing abuse. But what I presented was far more devastating. A comprehensive, legally sound case complete with hospital records, surveillance footage, and years of documented trauma. Prosecutor. Janet Morrison listened intently, her expression shifting from curiosity to horror as I laid out my files. The medical documents alone were alarming, but it was the video footage that left her visibly shaken. Watching Marcus unleash violence while our parents stood by or helped cover it up spoke volumes. This is one of the most thoroughly documented domestic abuse cases I've ever encountered, she said as she flipped through photographs of my injuries. The pattern of escalation, the complicity, it's undeniable. We have more than enough to bring charges against all three. I handed over the flash drives. The videos don't just show the attacks. They capture the aftermath, how they manipulated the truth, how they blamed me. I've lived my entire life being told this was normal. Morrison studied my timeline, her expression hardening. Aggravated assault, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, witness intimidation. These are major felony charges. Are you prepared to testify in court against your own family? Without hesitation, I replied. They've done enough. That afternoon, Morrison presented the case to a grand jury. 3 days later, formal indictments were issued. Marcus was charged with aggravated assault, use of a deadly weapon, and domestic violence. Dad faced obstruction and conspiracy charges. Mom was indicted as an accessory and co-conspirator. Each charge carried potential prison sentences. The arrests happened on a Thursday morning while I was at school. By the time I returned home, the police were gone. The house was silent, empty. After 19 years of unchecked abuse, the cycle had finally ended. The trial lasted 2 weeks. I spent 3 full days on the stand, recounting each incident with unwavering clarity. Facing them across the courtroom should have been terrifying, but I felt nothing but grim resolve. As I detailed their cruelty with clinical precision, I watched their confidence evaporate. Marcus's attorney attempted to frame the abuse as rough sibling play, taken out of context. That defense collapsed when the jury saw footage of him swinging a bat at my head while I cowered, pleading. Their expressions told the whole story. They weren't buying it. Dad's lawyer claimed he had never witnessed the violence, insisting he always arrived after the fact. But video footage exposed that lie, showing him watching Marcus strike me, then helping to fabricate an excuse within seconds. His voice dismissing the bruises as drama sealed his fate. Mom's defense was the weakest of all. Her attorney tried to portray her as a passive mother, manipulated by her husband and son. But the footage told a different story, her leading the gaslighting, mocking my pain, blaming me every time. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Marcus was convicted on all charges. He received 8 years in prison. Dad got 5 years for conspiracy and obstruction. Mom received 3 years as an accessory to the crimes. Before handing down the sentences, the judge made it clear that he considered their actions particularly heinous due to the family relationship and the vulnerability of the victim. As the bailiffs led them away, Marcus finally looked at me. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. The same man who'd ruled our home with fists and threats was finally afraid. Afraid of the one person he never thought would stand up to him. The irony was beautiful. The fallout was swift. Marcus, arrogant and violent, became an easy target in prison. Dad lost his executive job at the Gravore Group once his criminal record went public. His pension was garnished to cover my medical expenses. Mom was shunned by neighbors and old friends, all horrified by what she'd helped conceal. They spent 19 years weaving a web of cruelty. Now they'd spend years trapped in it. As for me, I transferred to Arizona State University on a scholarship for domestic violence survivors. I majored in criminal justice with a plan to become a prosecutor myself, one who fights for girls like me, Some might say I was driven by revenge, say it was justice sought after a lifetime of being called fragile. Dramatic and weak, I had proven that the quiet girl they dismissed was their greatest threat all along.